The success of the Hoenn video got me thinking about what other aspects of the Gen 3 games could benefit from some reworking, and the most obvious answer is the availability of Pokemon from Gens 1 and 2. A big controversy surrounding the GBA games is how they removed compatibility with the original Kanto and Johto games. This was largely due to GameFreak completely overhauling how stats worked in the move to Gen 3, along with the addition of abilities, but that didn't matter to longtime fans. They just knew that the Charizard they've had since Red and then transferred to Gold couldn't then be transferred up to Ruby. Now, while getting Kanto Pokemon to Hoenn wasn't much of an issue given that we got Gen 1 remakes the year after Ruby and Sapphire released, it did put Johto Pokemon in a bit of a dead zone, since Heart Gold and Soul Silver wouldn't get released until 2008 on the DS. The way the Pokemon Company went about solving this problem was incredibly sleazy. The slogan of the franchise has always been, "Gotta catch 'em all." But if you wanted to complete the National Pokédex in Gen 3, you really had to pay for it. Tamashi Hiroka made a great video on this that'll be linked in the description. But to summarize, if you, as an individual, wanted to complete the National Pokédex using as few games and consoles as possible while only doing a single playthrough of each game, it was going to cost you over $600 because of the way they spread out Pokemon across the GBA and GameCube games. This is to say nothing about all of the events they had for different Pokemon that you could not miss if you wanted to complete the National Pokédex. Today, it's flat out impossible to complete the National Pokédex in both Gen 3 and Gen 4 without glitches. This is due to Deoxys only being available through in-person events in Gen 3 and a downloadable Pokemon Rangers Guardian Signs mission in Gen 4. Now let's take a trip back in time and imagine that I was able to convince GameFreak to make it so that you only needed the GBA games to complete the National Pokédex, and that in-person events weren't required. Let's see how we could add these Johto Pokemon and Mythical Hoenn legendaries in ways that enhance both the Hoenn and Kanto experiences. Kanto specifically has a big issue. GameFreak was so strict about making FireRed and LeafGreen accurate to the original experiences that you couldn't get access to Johto Pokemon until the post-game. For some bafflingly stupid reason, this also includes Johto Pokemon that were evolutions of Kanto Pokemon. So that means no more Crobat, Blissey, Bellossom, Politoed, Steelix, Kingdra, Slowking, Scizor, Porygon 2, Umbreon, or Espeon. This makes next to zero sense when you're viewing these games on a timeline. These remakes came out during Gen 3 and were bought in no small part by people who played Gen 2 and who were able to find Johto Pokemon in Kanto in the Gen 2 post-games. Some Johto Pokemon were actually exclusive to Kanto in Gold, Silver, and Crystal. Wouldn't it make sense for them to still be there in the newest version of Kanto? No, apparently not. Instead, Johto Pokemon in Kanto were exclusive to the Sevi Islands, and all but Slugma and Macargo were exclusive to the 4 islands you only gain access to in the post-game. You know what was also made exclusive to the Sevi Islands? Moltres, who you captured in Victory Road in the original games, and this is the first change I would make. Moltres being in a completely new location outside of Kanto is odd, and the same goes for it being in Victory Road of all places in the original games, when Zapdos and Articuno are both given locations that fit their types. This gives us the chance to do something really interesting with Moltres, something you've never seen in the mainline games. What if Blaine used Moltres as his ace? After losing to you, he says that he must have become weaker once he started relying on Moltres' raw power, and gives it to you as a gift while he recommits himself to training regular fire types to be as strong as they can be. This makes Blaine's battle unique from anything else the player's ever seen before. We've never had a gym leader use a legendary Pokemon, at least up to this point. It also now gives us Mount Ember as a free location to work with, and I think you know where I'm going with this. When you first get to go there after beating Blaine, you'll be asked by a group of monks and nuns to help them deal with Team Rocket interfering with their work. What are they working on? A tower honoring Ho-Oh that gets completed after you beat the Pokemon League. At which point, you must complete a series of trials to gain access to the top of the tower. If you have a Pokemon in your party that's level 80 or higher, Ho-Oh will honor your strength as a trainer and battle you. Giving Ho-Oh a Kanto location makes sense given how Ash saw Ho-Oh in the first episode of the Pokemon anime flying over Kanto. But what to do with Lugia? I'd say put it in Hoenn because dive. Lugia is the diving Pokemon, so giving it a post-game exclusive dive location in Hoenn would fit well. Perhaps expand Hoenn's underwater section to include an entirely new cave system that gets discovered after you hit a certain Pokédex total. Johto added 100 new Pokemon, so that would work well as the number of Pokemon you'd have to register before this event triggers. The cave system where you find Lugia could be home to fossil Pokemon and have Relicanth as the common encounter, as opposed to the regular diving areas where it's incredibly rare. This lets Hoenn continue to be the region of mythology, now having this hidden wealth of Pokemon that everyone thought had gone extinct ages ago. It also plays into Lugia's original meaning of being a mother figure. In this context, it's created a haven for Pokemon that could no longer survive the current conditions. So what to do with Johto's other legendaries? The dogs were notoriously handled as afterthoughts, and even had a glitch that just deletes them from your game entirely if they roar you away. Hoenn's lack of a real post-game outside of the Battlefront tier gives me a lot of space to work with without messing anything up. My ice location idea from the previous video could help with this. Along with being the home of the legendary version of Chimecho, the area could also have a lake where a single Suicune can be encountered at a 1% rate, as if it's patrolling the grounds. Or it could be a boss that the player has to overcome on their way to solving Chimecho's mystery, and this would let the legendary dogs take the place of guards for Hoenn's disturbed legendaries. With Entei, it could be found at the top of Mount Chimney, now guarding the location after Groudon's been put back into a slumber by Rayquaza. Raikou would be found on a new island close to Kyogre Sea Basin, with thunderstorms ravaging the area as a deterrent to anyone approaching. This leaves Celebi, who I'd have as the only Johto legendary capturable in both the Hoenn and Kanto Gen 3 games. If the player catches every Pokemon in the Safari Zone in a Safari Ball, they'd unlock a new location at the back of the Safari Zone, a small forest with a shrine to Celebi at its deepest point. This gives the Safari Zone some story meaning beyond being a place where you can get an HM in Kanto. It also makes the Safari Zone look more humane and less like game hunting, something the Pokemon Company tried to do more and more before just getting rid of the idea outright in Gen 5. Would this be a borderline impossible task normally? Yes. But let's say we modify the catch and encounter rates so that this is more like a really hard task, and not something that's exclusively done by YouTubers making challenge videos 15 years after the games came out. So what about Hoenn's legendaries? Jirachi and Deoxys were complete non-factors in the original games, so let's fix that. First and foremost, let's use the space station to let the player go to the moon to fight Deoxys. It was right there! Hell, let the player go to the back of the moon whenever they want. Give it a light side and a dark side, where you can go to evolve Eevee into Umbreon and Espeon. Given that there are other Pokemon with extraterrestrial origins, we could have them capturable here, but with a twist. On the moon, you would be able to encounter the Clefable and Starmie lines, along with Lunatone and Solrock. Except on the moon, their shiny colors are their default forms. This would be an incredibly cool way to introduce new fans to shiny Pokemon like the Red Gyarados did in Gen 2. Jirachi would be an interesting case. Being the Wish Pokemon, we could have Jirachi start roaming around Hoenn after the player gives an interview answer to the TV crew that mentions wishes. This lets the event be triggered at any point in the story, with its level being determined by the number of badges you have. That leaves Mew as the only legendary Pokemon not accounted for. Simply, I would have it be your reward for capturing every other Pokemon in the National Pokédex, instead of the underwhelming choice of a single Johto starter. That makes every legendary Pokemon capturable in the GBA games. As for the Johto starters, I'd have them released into the Kanto and Hoenn Safari Zones after you beat the Elite Four. Now let's take a look at the regular Johto Pokemon that still need a place in these regions, preferably making them readily available before the 5th gym. Having all the legendaries figured out cuts our need back by 6, and the starters back by 9, for a total of 15 Pokemon already accounted for. But there's more we can trim to get a better look at which Pokemon are of high priority. We can also exclude any Johto Pokemon that's either an evolution or pre-evolution of a Kanto Pokemon if we remove the restrictions originally present in FireRed and LeafGreen. which we should. That gets rid of 17 Pokemon, but we're not done yet. You usually won't be able to find fully evolved Stage 2 Pokemon in the wild, at least not until the post-game, so we can trim our priorities by another 3. And then there's the few Johto Pokemon you actually can find pretty early in the Hoenn games without much issue. If we were to include the Hoenn Safari Zone, this would shred our total, but I'd rather make these Pokemon available in normal encounters and make the Safari Zone feel like a Hoenn Safari Zone instead of just Johto rejects. Trimming the Johto Pokemon you can find in Hoenn in regular encounters or as gifts, we drop the Magcargo line, the Lantern line, the Azumarill line, Wobbuffet, and Corsola, another 8 Pokemon. So out of Johto's 100 new Pokemon, we get to cut 37 of them from the list of Pokemon we need to find new spots for. That leaves us with 63 different Pokemon, which isn't nearly as much as it sounds. Let's go through them in Pokédex order. Sentret and Hoothoot are easy ones. Toss them in Viridian Forest and Petalburg Woods respectively as 12% encounters. It's rare, but it's not too rare. You could also do the same for Lediba and Spinarak, but that feels like it would be front-loading too much. Let's put those two in the areas around Fortree City while leaving them out of the Kanto games. Next up is the Xatu line, notable for its appearance in the Mossdeep City Gym. Originally exclusive to the Hoenn Safari Zone like many Johto Pokemon, I'd now put these two in Mount Pyre and Route 123, making them available in the same area as many of Hoenn's Birdkeeper trainers. In Kanto, routes 14 and 15 seem best, close to both the Safari Zone and Lavender Town. Having access to a solid Psychic type like Xatu should help greatly with the Sabrina battle. The trouble with the Mareep line, and an issue that also applies to Miltank, is that neither Kanto nor Hoenn have farm areas to easily plop these Pokemon in. They also don't have areas where sheep or cattle would graze naturally. If these were the only Johto Pokemon in the Hoenn Safari Zone, I wouldn't have an issue with it. There's nowhere else for them to go that doesn't seem either unnatural or like they'd be taking the spot of another Pokemon in that area or one really close to it. Throw Miltank in the Kanto Safari Zone too to have it pair with Tauros. Sudowoodo's place in Hoenn is so obvious I'm surprised they didn't actually do it. Normally, you can only get it as a one-off in the Battle Frontier. But with how Hoenn lets you water berry plots, I think you could make this very interesting by giving each plot a random chance of having a Sudowoodo appear in it. This fits Sudowoodo perfectly, and gives the berry plots another interesting element. The next 4 Pokemon lines all fit the same areas. The Sunflora and Jumpluff lines, along with Aipom and Yanma, belong in woodland and grassy areas. Let's put Yanma alongside Nugget Bridge in Kanto and Route 120 in Hoenn. Aipom can go on routes 119, 120, and 123 in Hoenn while not being in Kanto. Sunkern, Hoppip, and Skipbloom would go right outside the fresh air of Verdant Turf on Route 117 in Hoenn, and again I would leave them out of Kanto. The ability to get so many Johto Pokemon through evolving Kanto Pokemon is enough for me to only sparsely add other Johto Pokemon to the remakes. Wooper and Quagsire need to be left out of Hoenn because Swampert's the water ground star of the region. So where do they go in Kanto? How about Victory Road and the route preceding it? These feel like fitting locations for them. Murkrow and Misdreavus notoriously got done dirty in their original games. You can't even find Murkrow in Johto, only being available in routes exclusive to Kanto. And Misdreavus is only encounterable on Mount Silver, exclusively at night. Why the hell did they do this to 2 of the coolest Pokemon of the generation? Johto straight up has a Ghost-type gym leader that doesn't use the region's only Ghost Pokemon, instead opting for an all-Gengar line team. I want to make these 2 available very early so that people can understand how damn cool they are, making up for them being unavailable in Johto's early game. In Hoenn, Murkrow's going to be encounterable on Route 116, 121, and 112 along with the Fiery Path. In Kanto, it'll be encounterable on Route 3 on the way to Mount Moon. If I could have dropped my Pidgey for a Murkrow that early, I would have realized Murkrow was one of my favorite Pokemon so much sooner than I did. As for Misdreavus, her place in Kanto is obvious. Lavender Town, the Pokemon Tower, and let's also put Missy on Route 7. Finally, you'll have a Ghost Pokemon to face Sabrina that isn't weak to Psychic attacks. What a concept. Hoenn's also pretty obvious with Mount Pyre, but I'd also toss Missy around Meteor Falls along with Haunter, giving the implication that people used to live there since spirits are roaming the location. This would get justified in the remakes where we learn that the Draconid people used to live in Meteor Falls and worship Rayquaza. Unown is a sad case. Its lore is so cool, but it's a terrible Pokemon, and we already have so many post-game and additional areas that giving it one just seems like overkill. No game it's been in has ever made it feel as interesting and powerful as the Entei movie did. Sorry bud, you're still stuck in the Sevi Islands. Actually, that might not be a bad thing. Unown got its own location in the Kanto remakes, the Tanabe Chambers outside Island 7, of which there are 7. To make this special, you have to include a legendary Pokemon, and them not doing so is probably the reason you don't remember these mini islands even existed. Instead of Entei, who's already got a home guarding Groudon in Hoenn, what if we made this a special puzzle where your reward for solving it is finding Mew? This gives Mew a location in Kanto instead of locking it behind completing the National Pokédex in the remakes. Suddenly, Unown's meaningful again. Now we get to the less exciting members of Johto. Pineco gets Route 114 and 15 in Hoenn, then Route 4 and 9 in Kanto. Level 55 Dunsparces will be in Hoenn's Victory Road, both as a joke and to make the level grinding easier in the late game. Gligar gets put in the desert portions of Route 111, that's an easy one. So much of Hoenn's late game being on the water makes it hard to work strong non-water Pokemon into the game's early areas without overloading them. So for the sake of it, I'll put Snubbull on Route 110 and Granbull on Victory Road, another strong normal type to KO for good experience while grinding for the league. Quillfish will replace half of the Tentacruel water areas to make things at least somewhat more interesting. Shuckle's another interesting one. Given its connection to berry juice, we could have it as a potential encounter when picking berries, and also make it available in the grass patches behind the flower shop near Rustboro City. Oh crap, I forgot Girafarig. And that's how you end up in the Safari Zone. Now we're on the home stretch. Heracross seems like a very easy Victory Road addition, and having it be a rare encounter in a few scattered areas around Fortree City also makes sense. Sneasel, Delibird, and the Swinub line already have a place in my idea for Emerald's postgame, but they could also be in Shoal Cave's Icebox and the cave system in Kanto where you find Articuno. Now Teddy Ursaring. Route 114 and 15 for Ursaring, 116 for Teddy Ursa. Tossing a few Johto water Pokemon into Kanto's oceans could be fun, and having this bunch roaming Hoenn's waters could really make these routes feel less tedious since you'll have a lot more variety when it comes to your encounters. Houndour gets placed on the Fiery Path, while Phanpy gets put in the Jagged Pass. Let's also put Stantler in the Jagged Pass and on the routes next to Meteor Falls. Smeargle could be found near the end of Route 121, since Lilycove has an art institute. You could even have a little side mission where you end up battling the Institute's curator, and have them using a few Smeargles with hilarious movesets to show new players what it can do. Lastly, Larvitar and Pupitar. Route 111 should have Larvitar, and one Victory Road floor should have Pupitars. While I still do want to keep an enhanced Claydol as Hoenn's Desert Legendary, having a powerful Tyranitar somewhere else on Route 111, as was suggested in the comments of the last Hoenn video, does really appeal to me. Maybe have an underground chamber for Claydol on one end, accessed early on, and an above ground chamber for Tyranitar that appears in the post-game, like Volcarona in Relic Tower. And there we have it, every Johto Pokemon given a place across Hoenn and Kanto, and every legendary Pokemon made capturable through just the GBA games. I think these additions would make the Hoenn games and the Kanto remakes much more fun, even if you completely ignored the legendaries. Having so many more options for team building would make these games even more replayable than they already are, and the ability to spotlight more Pokemon is always a good thing. What do you think of these ideas? If you could spice up the Pokemon variety in your favorite region, where would you do it, and with what Pokemon? Tell me in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and check out the previous Hoenn video linked on the left. Thanks for watching!